I remember asking, where are you from? Where did this happen? And he said, the apartment number. And I said, do you know who did this to you? No, I do not. The guy had a mask on. He said he did not know who did it to him.
This is Kevin Keith, the man convicted of brutally murdering 3 members of the Chapman family. He spent years on death row awaiting execution. But despite his conviction, many people, including celebrities, believe he may be innocent. So did the justice system get it right, or was the wrong man sentenced to die? In this video, we're taking a closer look at the brutal murders that tore the Chapman family apart and the decades-long controversy that continues to divide people to this day. Marichelle Chapman was 24, a young mom living in the Bucyrus Estates apartments with her daughter Marche, who had just turned 4. Everyone who knew Marichelle said the same thing. She was warm, she was close with her family, she was just trying to build a good life for her little girl. Her older brother Rudel called her his best friend. Her aunt, Linda Chapman, was 39. People described her as the kind of aunt who actually showed up, the one who made you feel loved just by being in the room. On the night of February 13th, Linda was over at Marichelle's place. So were 2 of the little cousins, 6-year-old Juanita Reeves and her 4-year-old brother Quentin, just visiting for the evening. Marichelle's boyfriend, 23-year-old Richard Warren, was there too. 3 adults, 3 kids, 1 apartment, and somebody was about to knock on that door and change everything. What happened that night is honestly hard to put into words. Juanita and Quentin survived, but they paid for it for the rest of their lives. Months in hospitals, years of therapy. Juanita has said the pain never really leaves her, even now, even on good days. And little Marky never made it out at all. She was 4. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here all the time, so if you're into this stuff, go ahead and subscribe. It really helps. So, back to that knock on the door. From what investigators pieced together, Linda Chapman went to answer it and recognized the guy standing there. He had a mask covering his mouth. She let him in. He sat down. He chatted with everyone, casual as anything. He even asked for a glass of water. He drank it right through the mask. Then he asked for a second glass. And when he finished that one, he reached into a bag he'd brought and pulled out a 9mm handgun. He told everyone to get on the floor, adults, kids, everybody, face down. Then he opened fire. 24 shell casings later, he walked out, got into a car that was waiting for him, and drove off into the night like nothing happened. Richard Warren had been shot in the jaw and twice in the back, but somehow he found the strength to push past the shooter and run. He staggered through the snow, bleeding the whole way, until he reached a nearby restaurant called Ike's. People rushed to help him. A police officer who happened to be there asked who did this to him. Warren's answer? I don't know. The guy had a mask on. When first responders got to the apartment, it was already too late for 3 of them. Marichelle gone, Linda gone, 4-year-old Marche gone. Juanita and Quentin were rushed to hospitals in critical condition. They'd survive, but barely, and the road back would take years. Even seasoned cops who'd seen a lot of bad stuff said this scene stuck with them in a different way. Minor shots in their beds tend to do that. So now the big question, why? Why would someone walk into a random Sunday night family hangout and execute almost everyone in the room? Investigators think they found the answer pretty fast, and it all came down to Marichelle's brother, Rudel Chapman. Rudel was working as a confidential informant for the police. Not long before the murders, he'd helped set up a drug raid in Crestline, Ohio, about 10 minutes away. That raid landed several people in trouble, including a 30-year-old man named Kevin Keith, who got arrested for selling crack cocaine. Keith was out on bail, just waiting for his court date, when the Chapman family got shot. So the theory investigators landed on was simple. Kevin Keith was furious about getting arrested, blamed Rudel for snitching on him, and went after his family to get even. Rudel himself wasn't even there that night, but his sister, his aunt, and his niece were. And apparently, in the twisted logic of street revenge, that was close enough. 48 hours after the murders, a SWAT team hit Kevin Keith's door. He was arrested and charged with 3 counts of aggravated murder, plus 3 counts of attempted murder. But here's the thing, though. Nobody had even questioned him before they decided to arrest him. Kevin Keith grew up in Crestline, Ohio, born in 1963, in one of the only black families in a small, tight-knit town. He played football in high school, won a state championship, and by most accounts was a well-liked kid. His family later moved to Canton, a bigger city, and things got harder from there. By his mid-20s, he'd gotten caught up in the crack epidemic that was tearing through the Midwest at the time. He'd done time for theft, then for dealing. When he got out, he moved back to Crestline hoping for a fresh start. It didn't exactly go that way. He actually knew the Chapman family. Marichelle was his ex-girlfriend. He'd spent time around Juanita and Quentin. Small town. Everybody knew everybody. And that familiarity ends up making this whole case a lot messier than it first looks. Now here's where things get really uncomfortable. The entire case against Kevin Keith basically came down to eyewitnesses, and almost none of it holds up well when you look closely. Start with Richard Warren, the only adult who survived and had actually been in the room. Remember, he told everyone at the restaurant, including a cop, that he had no idea who shot him because the guy had a mask on. The next morning, he was in surgery recovery, couldn't even talk because of a tube down his throat. A nurse later testified that Warren wrote the name Kevin on a piece of paper. That paper was never entered as evidence. The nurse said she didn't keep it. Years later, records showed the note actually still existed somewhere, which raises a lot of questions about what really happened there. Then a police captain called Warren in the hospital and read him 4 last names over the phone, just asking which one sounded right. Warren said he was about 75% sure it was Keith. That call wasn't recorded. When they showed him a photo lineup, Kevin Keith's picture was framed differently than the others, zoomed in more, which naturally draws the eye. A psychologist later tested that same lineup on over 500 people who had zero connection to the case. More than 75% of them also picked Kevin Keith's photo. Not because they remembered anything, just because of how the picture looked. At trial, Warren pointed at Kevin Keith across the courtroom and said that's the man who shot him. He also testified that during the shooting, Marichelle screamed, "Kevin, what are you doing? Kevin, stop." And the shooter said back, "Don't say my name." If that's true, it's about as damning as it gets. But here's the catch. Warren had already told people he didn't know who it was. Then, while heavily medicated the next morning, investigators handed him the name Kevin. Warren himself admitted on the stand he wasn't even sure anymore if the name came from him first or from the police. Memory researchers say this kind of thing happens more than people think. When someone's traumatized, drugged, and surrounded by people who are convinced they already know the answer, that answer can slowly become part of their memory. The brain just doesn't separate what it actually saw from what it was told afterward. There was also a neighbor, Nancy Smathers, who said she saw a big guy running from the building and jumping into a getaway car. She couldn't describe his face at all. Later, after watching the news coverage and seeing Kevin Keith's photo everywhere, she called police and said, "Yep, that's him." Defense lawyers called it exactly what it sounds like, a contaminated identification. And here's the part of this case that really gets me. While 6-year-old Juanita Reeves was recovering in the hospital, a nurse asked her whose fault it was that she got hurt. Juanita said it was her daddy's friend, Bruce Melton, not Kevin Keith. She even said the shooter's head shape didn't match, because Kevin Keith has a really distinctive pointed head. Juanita and Quentin never testified at trial. They were still in the hospital. And that first statement Juanita gave, naming someone else entirely, was never even entered into evidence. Over the years, Juanita's memory changed. She became completely certain it was Kevin Keith. When his appeals lawyer, Rachel Troutman, later showed her the original police interview, Juanita insisted she never said any of that. She never responded after seeing the paperwork. Again, memory experts say this tracks. Memory isn't like a video recording. It updates based on what you're told and what you come to believe over time. If a child grows up hearing one name over and over for 30 years, that name is going to become the truth in her mind, whether it started out that way or not. To be clear, nobody thinks Juanita is lying. She genuinely believes what she remembers now. The real question is whether that memory is from that night or from everything she was told afterward. While Kevin Keith sat in jail waiting for trial, another name was floating around the edges of the case. The same name Juanita gave in the hospital. Rodney Melton. Melton was 38, with a record that included killing a man when he was just 17. He was the brother of Bruce Melton, the name Juanita mentioned. And here's the kicker. The same informant, Rudel Chapman, had also been helping police build a case against the Meltons over a pharmacy burglary ring. According to state pharmacy board records, the Meltons had let it be known that anyone who snitched on them would be killed. 2 weeks before the Chapman family was murdered, Melton reportedly told an informant he'd been paid $15,000 to hurt the guy responsible for exposing his operation. 2 weeks before, Then there's the getaway car. Witnesses described it as cream or light yellow. Kevin Keith's car was dark green, but the state's forensic analyst testified that a partial license plate mark, the numbers 043, found pressed into the snow at the scene, matched a car linked to Keith. Rodney Melton drove a yellow car. And guess what was in his license plate number? 043. Melton's own family was apparently so scared of what he might have done that some of them went to Kevin Keith's defense lawyer during the trial. The defense brought Melton up as an alternate suspect. Even the prosecutor admitted it was worth looking into. That conversation happened off the record, the trial just kept going, and Rodney Melton was never charged with anything. Here's maybe the most important fact in this whole case. After testing fingerprints, glass, and fibers from the scene, investigators found exactly 0 physical evidence linking Kevin Keith to the murders. Not one thing. The entire forensic case rested on one state analyst, G. Michelle Yezzo, who testified that the license plate mark and tire tracks matched Keith's car. What Kevin's defense didn't know at the time, and what the state never told them, was that Yezzo was already under internal investigation while working this case. Her own co-workers had documented that she tended to give police the results they wanted rather than what the evidence actually showed. Internal records even warned that her mistakes were going to lead to a miscarriage of justice. She was eventually forced to retire. In 2016, another man's conviction got overturned because of her unreliable work on his case. Kevin's appeals lawyer, Rachel Troutman, found all of this years later through a random Google alert. She dug into Yezzo's personnel file and found credibility issues that had been sitting there since before Kevin's trial even started. None of it was ever handed to the defense. A federal court later confirmed it flat out. The state hid this information. Kevin Keith came within 13 days of being executed, based partly on testimony from an analyst the state already knew wasn't trustworthy. Kevin Keith's trial started on May 10, 1994, just 3 months after the murders. His lawyer had never handled a death penalty case before. He brought in alibi witnesses who placed Keith 30 miles away in Mansfield, Ohio, at the time of the shooting, arguing it wasn't physically possible for him to have done it. The jury heard Richard Warren point across the room and say, "That man right there, that's the man who shot me." They heard about the supposed motive. They heard the forensic analyst's testimony about the license plate. What they didn't hear: Juanita's original hospital statement naming someone else, or anything about Rodney Melton's yellow car and his alleged $15,000 payoff. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury found Kevin Keith guilty on every count. Then, they sentenced him to death. The same day the verdict came down, 2 Bucyrus police officers quit the force. They never came back, and they never explained why. Make of that what you will. Kevin Keith spent years on death row, getting turned down at every level of appeal. His public defender, Harry Reinhart, raised issue after issue: the nurse's missing note, the sketchy phone lineup, the contaminated photo spread, but the courts kept saying no. Then Rachel Troutman took over the case. Just 3 years out of law school, she told Kevin, "If you're innocent, there's something out there that proves it." And bit by bit, over years of digging, she found it. But the courts still weren't budging. In 2010, the Ohio Parole Board voted 8-0 against clemency. It all came down to one person: Governor Ted Strickland. Kevin told Rachel he wouldn't ask for a life sentence for something he says he didn't do. So she had to walk into the governor's office and ask for a full pardon, or watch the execution happen. The state actually moved Kevin into the execution cell to prepare. The man scheduled to die right after him helped him carry his things in. They talked to each other through the walls about what was coming. 13 days before the execution date, September 15, 2010, Governor Strickland commuted Kevin's sentence to life without parole. He was clear that he wasn't declaring Kevin innocent. He just said the questions in this case were too serious, and an execution is the one punishment you can never take back. For Juanita and Quentin, who had wanted to see the man they believed killed their family executed, this news was crushing. But Juanita later said she was actually glad it turned into life instead of death. Not because she thought he deserved to live, but because, as she put it, the victims don't get to die either. "We got a life sentence," she said. "He should too." In October 2018, a federal appeals court granted Kevin Keith a new review of his case. The court agreed with what Rachel Troutman had been arguing for years. The state hid evidence about analyst Yezzo's dishonesty, and there was no way the defense could have found it on their own. That's a federal court officially on the record saying something went seriously wrong here. In 2022, Kim Kardashian even hosted a popular podcast series about the case, which brought a ton of new attention to the claims of innocence. Kevin Keith is still at Marion Correctional Institution in Ohio. He's 61 now. He's never confessed. He's maintained his innocence for over 30 years. Rachel Troutman is still fighting for him. Rodney Melton was never charged with anything. And Marichelle, Linda, and 4-year-old Marchie Chapman have never gotten a trial where all the evidence was actually put on the table. That's the part that should bother all of us, no matter what side of this you land on. 3 people were murdered that night. A mom, an aunt, a 4-year-old girl. 3 more were shot and somehow survived, carrying the scars forever. They were just a family hanging out on a Sunday night, nothing more. Look, reasonable people can go through this case and land in different places. But the way this investigation was run, the evidence that got buried, the analyst the state knew was dishonest and used anyway, and an alternate suspect with a matching getaway car and an actual documented motive who was never really looked at, all of that deserved way more attention than it got. 2 cops quit the day the verdict came in. A governor stopped an execution just 13 days out. A federal court found the state hid evidence. These aren't small details. The Chapman family deserves real justice, the kind that actually gets it right. So, back to the question we started with. Did they actually get the right guy? Honestly, after everything you just heard, that's not for me to decide. It's for you. So what do you think? Is Kevin Keith guilty? Should this case get a full retrial so everyone finally hears all the evidence? And do you think Rodney Melton should have been investigated a lot harder than he was? Let me know in the comments. If this one got to you, hit the like button and subscribe. These victims deserve to be remembered, all of them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.